Can you hear me? I think so. Okay, so we've just launched, as VC said, our docs, and we have here some steps and some, let's say, easy tutorials. So the first one is actually the counters deployment, but for chain abstracted in a chain abstracted setting. Here, the main idea, I won't go through the setting up the environment and all of that because you'll have time to do that if you want to try our stuff. What I want to highlight here are two things. The first one is how are the contracts actually deployed? And the second thing that I want to highlight is actually how can we then actually trigger things on chain in a very easy manner, okay? And so for that, I want to go first to the first one contract, which is the counter deployer. And this is the counter deployer. It's a very small and simple piece of code. The main thing here that you, if you look at it, that you need to worry about is the chain slugs, right? So you just put the chain ID there and it's deployed, okay? That's it. So if you want to deploy on base, you just put the base. If you want to put optimism, you just put optimism. You don't need to worry about, oh, how many chains do I want to launch? Do I need to prepare to launch for a new chain? No, you just put there the ID and that's it, okay? And then there is the second part, which is part of what VC was talking about, which is, okay, so I want to trigger things in multiple chains because let's assume I have my gaming app, I have tokens in one chain, I have the NFTs in a different chain, and I have, I don't know, some special prizes that I want to give to users in a different chain, okay? And that is where we get our gateway. The gateway you can think about, as VC showed you on the slides, as the glue that connects all of them together, okay? So here we have a very simple example with a for loop that goes through the counters in each chain, okay? And just increments those counters in the different chains. And here is where you actually make it shine and socket shines, is that you can trigger these actions here in these functions in a asynchronous manner, okay? We have a way that we can trigger that. You can also revert it. We have here also documentation on that. So since we are triggering things that are asynchronous, how can we make sure that we can revert if some of the actions are not as we expect them to be, okay? And now just to show you a bit here. So for instance, here we had these, we had these counters here that were, we had these counters here that I just read with this script, which is pretty simple, just to check like what are the values of the counters in these three Sepolia chains, right? The optimism, arbitrum, and base. And when you look at it, it's like we're just getting information from different slots. Oh, sorry, let me just scroll up a bit. We get information from different slots, and those slots just tell you like, okay, this is what's happening in each state of the chain, and you don't need only to read. You can read and write based on the information that you get asynchronous from the multiple chains, and that's the beauty or the beautiful part of the app gateway, right? So your app gateway can orchestrate the apps as you see fit and with the needs that you want. So you can read, again, as I mentioned, the token balance from base, and then trigger a purchase of optimism, an NFT on optimism, or whatever you want. And so here I'm actually triggering, let me actually trigger that. I'm going to trigger live if the internet allows me. I'm going to trigger setting up the counters again. And while we're doing that, I'll also want to go back to the documentation just to show you something that we do have here, which is when we are reading, which is, or writing what we are doing right now, we do have this concept, which is a forwarded address. This is how everything ends up working. So we have in our off-chain VM, we have a representation of the contracts that are on-chain, which also have an address, which we called it a forwarded address, okay? So it basically just forwards information to read and write from chain. Okay, sorry. So we do get that information from and off chain this way. The nice part of having these addresses is that, as you saw, you can just keep coding in Solidity. If you're using Foundry, or if you're used to using Foundry, you just use Solidity, and here you keep using Solidity. So you just write everything that you need to do. You don't need to worry about if that chain has some particularity when reading or writing, because that will be handled off at a later or in the infrastructure level, right? And then you can just get your information here. Let me just check. Okay, we have it written. So we do have also some APIs available, just so you see. We also have some APIs available that allows us to know the state of our transaction if we get internet to do it. So as you can see, the previous one was already, the promise was resolved. Since we have this asynchronous manner, we brought the concepts from JavaScript that already have asynchronous and the promises, and that's how it actually works here as well, okay? It's still loading, no worries. While it's still loading, we can still talk about this topic, which is, okay, we just loaded the transaction. The transaction is being sent on-chain through the Watcher VM, through the multiple ones, and while it's sending the transaction, since we don't know if it's doing it, let's just also check the counters to see if they are increased or not from the previous values that we had. While it's running that, I also want to highlight that, as you saw from VC's presentation, we do have a lot of use cases. Here, some are of them that we also have bounties on. So for instance, here leveraging socket for horizontal scaling, meaning that if you want to reach out to the multiple chains that you have and create applications that need to reach all the users in different chains, this is how you can do it. For instance, we have here another more complex example after you go through the counters. We do have here an example for an ERC20 that is airdropping to all chains at the same time, okay? So it means that you can just get this code that it's here. So we have our token, which is a pretty simple token, and once we get to the gateway here, we can just airdrop those users. Okay, so here it's just multiple ideas of how we can scale, and honestly, it depends on what the projects want to do, because we're giving you the Microsoft Word so that you can build your document, okay, and you can build your application and build it in a way that does what it's supposed to do for you. Okay, so here it's actually resolved, so we should be seeing, okay, it failed to read on the internet. Otherwise, we would see if this runs, if I can get access to the internet. As we can see here, the promise is resolved, meaning that all the orchestration that I did to send the transaction on chain for all the chains was working, and it sent and deployed on all 3 chains, okay? Let me just, I wanted to finish with the counters incrementing so that you could guys see what we have here. If you have any questions, okay, time's up. So if you have any questions, we are on the booth near the Coinbase booth on the corner. So come talk to us. We have a bunch of people and it's going to be fun. Thank you.